Today we're going to be talking about a really common mistake that I see a lot of physics students make when it comes to understanding the relationship between velocity and acceleration. And that mistake is a lot of people seem to think that a positive acceleration means that the object is speeding up, and a negative acceleration means that the object is slowing down. However, that is not always the case. Okay, these statements are sometimes true, but definitely not always true. Okay, let me correct this. Right, so this is not true. What is true is that when velocity and acceleration have the same direction, an object will speed up and when velocity and acceleration have opposite directions, an object will slow down. Remember that velocity and acceleration are both vectors, which is why we need to consider its direction. So let's think about the example of an object that is launched straight up into the air. Straight up into the air and then falls back down to its original height, okay? And so I've drawn what this would look like on a graph here, where the y-axis is height and the x-axis is time. So as time passes, we see that the object moves upward, reaches a max height, and then falls back down to its original height. So that's what would be happening here in a situation where we launch a ball straight up into the air, okay? And so let's first consider the first half of this object's motion. So that would be from here to here, right? Well, we know that this object was launched upwards. That's why initially it gains height, right? And so if that's the case and our upwards direction is the positive y direction, then our velocity is going to be a positive value, okay? And for an object that's launched straight up into the air, we know that the acceleration that it experiences is going to be due to gravity, right? And of course, gravity acts straight downward, so the acceleration is going to be negative. Now, according to our misconception here, a negative acceleration might mean that something is slowing down, okay? And in this case, that is true, right? And the reason for that is you can see, let's say that our initial velocity was 20 meters per second, let's say, positive 20 meters per second. And our acceleration is negative 10 meters per second squared. So that's kind of approximating gravity's, the acceleration due to gravity, which is, we normally write as negative 9.8, but here we'll approximate it as negative 10. Then what this means is that since acceleration is the change in velocity over time, an acceleration of negative 10 meters per second squared means that the velocity changes by negative 10 meters per second every second. Okay, so when 1 second passes, our velocity should decrease by 10 meters per second. And that's what we would observe. So after 1 second, the velocity will now be 10 meters per second. And after another second, so after 2 seconds total, we will be at 0 meters per second. And 0 meters per second would be where we reach that maximum height. Okay, but anyways, you do see that the speed is decreasing. Remember, speed is just the magnitude of our velocity, so the speed is decreasing. And so in this case, yes, the negative acceleration does mean that we're slowing down, okay? However, when we consider the second half of this motion, okay, well, after it reaches the maximum height here, and the velocity is now 0 at the top, the object is going to start coming back down to its original height, right? And when it does that, the velocity is actually negative. And the reason for that is that our displacement is actually negative because our final height will actually be less than our initial height at every point along this second half of the motion, right? And so our velocity here, starting from here to here, is going to be negative. But how about our acceleration? Well, the object that's falling down is still experiencing the exact same acceleration, which is the acceleration due to gravity. And so the acceleration is going to be negative, okay? Does that mean that the ball is still slowing down as it comes back down to the original height? No, right? Because let's say now our initial height here is 0 meters per second, right? Which is right at the top. After a second passes, right, our velocity will be negative 10 meters per second. And after another second passes, then it'll be negative 20 meters per second, okay? And so what do we see is happening to the speed? Well, the speed, which is just the magnitude of our velocity, is increasing. So this object is speeding up, right? And so, yes, the velocity is becoming more negative, but when we consider the magnitude of our velocity, we see that the value is actually increasing. And so in this case, a negative acceleration means that our object is speeding up. So again, this just goes to show that the acceleration, the sign that the acceleration has, so whether it's positive or negative, does not mean that something is speeding up or slowing down. Acceleration must be considered in the context of our velocity, okay? In this case, velocity and acceleration are going in opposite directions, which causes the object to slow down, so its speed decreases. But when the velocity and acceleration have the same direction, then the object is going to speed up, okay? And so this is quite intuitive when you think about this example of the ball being launched in the air, because we know that due to gravity, the ball will slow down until it reaches a maximum height, right? And that's because velocity is positive going upwards, but gravity acts downwards. And then once the ball turns around and starts coming back down, then the ball is going to speed up, right? You see objects fall down and speed up due to gravity. And so in that case, velocity is negative, and acceleration is also negative, okay? Let's do one more example. So for this example, let's say that we have a cart that is traveling horizontally along a path, and it's moving towards the left, okay? We see here that the leftwards direction is the negative x direction, and so that means our velocity is going to be negative, okay? And so the velocity is negative 12 meters per second. And let's also say that due to friction, the acceleration of the cart is positive 4 meters per second, okay? If you haven't learned this yet, I'll just let you know ahead of time that friction is going to oppose the motion of the object. And so we will see that it acts in the positive direction, to the right, okay? Now, if the acceleration is positive, what does that mean? Does it mean that the object is going to speed up? Well, as we just learned, the acceleration's direction doesn't actually tell us anything if we don't know about the direction of the velocity, okay? In this case, we need to look at both, and we find out that the acceleration and velocity have opposite directions. So before we even do any reasoning, I can go ahead and assume that our object is going to slow down because the velocity is negative and the acceleration acts in the opposite direction. It's positive, okay? And so let's think about this. Well, if the object starts off with a velocity of negative 12 meters per second, and the acceleration is positive 4 meters per second squared, well, that means that the velocity is going to change by positive 4 meters per second every second, right? So after a second passes, then our velocity is going to be negative 8 meters per second, and maybe after another second, it's going to be -4. And then after another second, after the 3 seconds pass, then it'll be 0 meters per second, okay? And then here we can see, right, that the speed is decreasing. The speed is decreasing, so the magnitude of our velocity is getting smaller. And so we see that this object is slowing down, okay? Hopefully that was helpful. Remember that positive acceleration does not necessarily mean something's speeding up, and negative acceleration doesn't mean that something is necessarily slowing down. It's all about the relationship between velocity and acceleration, which indicates whether the object's speed is going to increase or decrease. Okay, so speed increase or speed decrease.